Brant Moriarity here from Beats Per Minute Technologies LLC, demonstrating how to reap benefits from Excel by using Excel tables. What I have here is a very basic data set consisting of 5 different columns and several hundred rows. This data is made up. It's transactional data though. We have dates of transactions, employee IDs who sold it, item codes that were purchased, the unit price, and the quantity of each item sold. This data is a perfect example of an ideal candidate for converting to an Excel table. All that's required of a data set to convert to an Excel table is having no blank rows and no blank columns, and we have that requirement met here. And there are 2 main ways to make an Excel table. One way, on the Home tab, you can click in the Styles group the Format as Table, choose the style that you want, and that will create the table and apply that particular table style. The other way will be to have any cell with data in that data set selected. I've got A1 selected now, that's fine. On the keyboard, press Ctrl T, T for table. That brings up the Create Table dialog box that confirms the range of cells that you'll be using to convert to a table, and a checkbox that you can tell Excel whether or not your table contains headers. Now ideally, any dataset should have column headings. This one does, so I'll keep that checkbox checked. Click OK, and your table is created with the default table style based on your Excel application settings. If you don't like that table style, once you create the table, there's a new tab available to us on the ribbon called Table Tools Design. Now that tab is contextual. That means if the table is not selected, the tab doesn't exist. Let me select a cell outside of that table. As you can see, the tab goes away. Click back in that table, and the tab reappears. To the right, we have the table styles, so we can change the way that table looks by applying a different table style. Right now, we've got table style medium number 2 being applied. I can change that by clicking table style medium 3, and as you hover over each table style, you get a live preview, so you can see what it looks like before you commit to it. But I'll keep mine as table style medium 2. Now other options on that design ribbon. We have table style options with a series of checkboxes. Now by default, the filter button and banded rows checkboxes are checked. The banded rows create that visual effect of alternating colors row by row by row, plus the borders around each of those rows. The filter button creates these little filter buttons on the top of each of those column headings. More on those later. If you did have the checkbox checked that my table contains headers in that Create Table dialog box, the header row checkbox is also checked by default. If you clear that checkbox, that header row goes away. Just check the box again, and they reappear just like that. The first column and last column checkboxes are just options to further customize your table. The first column checkbox will simply bold the data in that first column. The last column checkbox will simply bold the data in that last column. Now, sometimes you might have data sets where it's preferable to have the columns banded and not the rows banded. So let me deselect banded rows and select banded columns. Similar visual effect, just along the columns versus the rows. You would rarely need both, but you could certainly have both if you needed to. I'm going to keep just my banded rows as the rows selected. Let's explore the filters. Each of these column headings have filters that allow us to either only see data that meets the criteria in that column, or to sort the data based on values in that column. So let's check unit price, for example. Drop-down menu, I can check from smallest to largest and have my smallest unit price up on top, and scroll down, those prices get bigger and bigger and bigger. So sorting becomes really easy to do in each of those columns. I can also use filters. So we have filters here, checkboxes, that have each value that exists in that column. If I want to see which items are exactly $18.35, I can deselect all and select just that one checkbox. But probably more useful in this case would be number filters. We have different options here of equals to, does not equal, greater than, and so on. Let me focus on greater than. If I choose greater than, I have the option for a custom autofilter. Is greater than what? Is greater than $10. I can also choose to have an and or an or and have a different requirement as well. I'll keep it as and, but in this time I'll say is less than, and we'll go with $17. Click OK. That will filter out all of my records, showing me just those unit priced items that fall within that range of greater than $10 and at the same time less than $17. Pretty useful stuff. Let me clear that filter out with one click of the mouse. Now, let's say I want to add a new column to calculate revenue. I already have my unit price. I already have my quantity. Excel tables make this really easy. The next blank cell, I'll type my new column heading of revenue. When I press enter, it adds that new column to my existing table. Fantastic. I can now put a formula in here that will multiply my unit price times my quantity. This is also where the value gets added for using Excel tables. Equal sign. I'll reference cell D2. Instead of the actual cell's address being shown there of D2, I'm getting the unit price column name. I can then multiply that by E2, which translates to a table formula of unit price times quantity. That's actually better than having E2 times D2, because unit price times quantity means something. And if I press enter, that same formula gets entered down the entire column automatically. One more benefit of having an Excel table. Now, let's go back to our Design tab. There's one checkbox left I didn't mention yet, and that's the total row. Let's check that box. That adds a row at the very bottom of our table, labeled total, with options for choosing different types of aggregate functions. Now, it wouldn't make sense to have any kind of aggregation on employee ID or item code, but I might want to have my average unit price, so I'll go ahead and select average. My average price is about $20.64. For my quantity, I might want to know total quantities, so I can sum those up. Same thing for revenue, summing up revenue. Now, the beauty of this is they aren't just average and sum functions being inserted. If you look at the actual formula here, Excel converts the sum, the average, the count into subtotal functions, which means if I filter out this data to show only certain records, those totals will only be applied to the visible records, and that's really fantastic. Also notice when I scroll down to the bottom of this record, the column headings up here are still visible. Yet another benefit of having an Excel table. Before we converted it, once we scrolled past a few rows, the column headings went away. And you may not know which column you're on. Now there's no need to guess. It's all right there, and there's no need to freeze the top row that you can also do if you don't convert it to an Excel table. That pretty much sums up the benefits of using Excel tables in a few short minutes.